Masechet Zevaḥim Daf Non Bet. On the previous daf, we cited this baraita that analyzes the 3 times in Vayikra Perek Daled that it says El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah, and we learned something from each one. The third one, that is for the chatat of a king, we learn El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah Ten Yesod LaMizbeach Shel Olah. We're reading Mizbach HaOlah to mean the Mizbeach where we burn a Korban Olah, which is the outside Mizbeach. And El Yesod, this comes to teach that one has to have a base on the outside Mizbeach, and that you have to pour the remainder of blood for all Korbanot on that base. So that's what we're learning from here. But then the Baraita challenged this and wondered, Zoeno ela mizbecha shel olah yehe lesod. Maybe mizbach ha'olah is not a reference to the outside mizbeach, but rather to the korban olah itself, that when you bring a korban olah, mizbecha, that sacrifice, you have to put on the wall somewhere on top of a base. That when you put the sprinkling of the blood of an olah, it has to be in a spot where beneath that wall there is a base, because the base does not actually go all the way around it. And then Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva cited a Kal Vachomer that no, we can figure out that law from a Kal Vachomer, since we don't know that law, since we don't need this derivation for that law, because we can learn it by itself. Therefore, that defends the original meaning. Well, now we're going to go back to that and question even that possibility that we thought that it's talking about a Korban Olah, or eno ela mizbeach shel olah yehe lisod. So in that baraita I said maybe this pasuk is talking about a korban olah, that the place that you're going to sprinkle on the mizbeach should be a place that is on top of a foundation. How could you read the pasuk that way? Mikitiv el yesod ha'olah, el yesod mizbach ha'olah ketiv. If it meant that you should sprinkle the blood on the wall where there is a base, then it simply should have said El Yesod HaOlah, that the Olah offering, when you're going to sprinkle it, it should be on top of where there is a base. Why would you need the word Mizbach and added to that pasuk if you were just going to teach me that you have to sprinkle it wherever there is a base? And so the answer is Ikat hava ketiv El Yesod HaOlah hava amina bizkifa El Yesod Hashtad ichtiv El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah agagot yisod. Because if it just said on the base of where you place the korban olah, I would have thought that meant even on the vertical side of the base, because here the base is 1 amah wide and 1 amah tall. So I might have thought that when you put the blood on the base, it could be even on the side of it. And therefore it says mizbach, because just like the mizbeach itself, the place where you put things is on top, on the flat side, so too for the base, the place where you put it is on top, on the flat part of it. So that's why it says okay, so now this is a new version of the challenge to the derasha in that baraita. And so now, Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva are again going to bring a Kal Vachomer, but this time, in this updated version, they're going to have to bring a Kal Vachomer from which we can learn that it has to be on top and not on the side of the base. Once we have a Kal Vachomer for that, then we can say, oh, well, we don't need the pasuk to teach us that it has to be on top, and therefore we can go back to the original derasha that the pasuk is teaching us that for all korbanot, you have to pour the shirayim on the base. Amar Rabbi Ishmael, Gag Yesod Lamali Kera, Kal Vachomer Hu. Why would I need a pasuk to teach me that we have to put the blood on the roof, on the flat part of the base? It's a Kal Vachomer. Uma shiarei chatat she'ena mechaperet te'una gag yesod. If the remnants of the blood for korban chatat, where pouring the remnants of the blood is not required for atonement, you already did the sprinkling, that's all that's required for atonement, so this is an extra thing that you do, and yet it has to be placed on the top side of the base, and we know that korban chatat you have to pour on the top of the base, because that's all the examples in chapter 4. It keeps saying mizbach ha'olah, so that certainly has to be on top. Then techilat olah shemechaperet enodin odin sheteuna gag yesod. So the beginning of the sprinklings of the korban olah, not the remnants, but rather the main sprinklings for a korban olah, which are required for atonement, so they're more important. All the more so, it will need to be sprinkled above the roof of the yesod. In other words, we were thinking in the Hava Amina, maybe you can do the sprinkling of the korban olah on the side of the base, and so now it says no. If even the remnant for korban chatat has to be on the top side, so then certainly the sprinkling of the korban olah has to be here or above. I mean, it could be anywhere until below the red line. It has to be below the red line up until the top side of the base, but cannot be on the vertical side of the base. So therefore, we know this from a kal vachomer, and then having gotten this out of the way from a kal vachomer, then we can go back and say that the pasuk itself can teach us that for all korbanot, one has to pour out the remnant onto the base, not just for korban chatat particularly, but they all have to be poured out on the base. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Uma sheyareh chatat she'en mechaperin ve'en ba'in lechaper teuna gag yesod techilat olam shemechaperet uba lechaper en odin sheteuna gag yesod. Rabbi Akiva is almost the same. He just adds 3 words and says, if regarding the pouring of the remainder of the blood for korban chatat, where that pouring does not atone, and its intention is not even to come to atone, it has nothing to do with it, and it still has to be placed on top of the base, then all the more so the beginning sprinklings of the korban olah, which are required for atonement, and their purpose is only to come to atone. That's their main purpose. All the more so, it's more important, it will have to be placed on or above the base, the top of the base. Okay, now imken matamud omar el yesod mizbach haolah ten yesod mizbach shel olah. So now we come back to the original conclusion that we started with, which is, if so, what do we learn from this instance of el yesod mizbach haolah? That one has to have a base for the outside mizbeach shel olah, and that you have to use that base, and you have to pour any remainder of any korban on that base. Mai benaihu. Question: what is the difference between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva adds 3 words, but what's the significance of those 3 words? We'll see 2 opinions. Amar Rav Ada bar Ahava, shirai me'akebim ika benaihu, mor savar me'akebi or mor savar la me'akebi. The difference between them is whether pouring out the remnant of the blood is necessary. Now, it doesn't atone, because we already said, according to everybody, that once you do the sprinkling, he received atonement. So you got atonement. But now, what if it spills and you didn't get spills on the floor and not on the base? Do you have to go get more blood so that you can put it on the base? So Rabbi Ishmael would say, yes, you have to. And Rabbi Akiva would say, no, you do not have to. It's not really clear from their words but why they say that. But perhaps because Rabbi Ishmael just says that it's ena mechaperet. It's not mechaper. So, okay, you don't need the pouring of the blood on the base is not needed for atonement, but maybe it is needed for something else. So it is needed as a requirement. Whereas Rabbi Akiva has more expansive. It says not needed for atonement. It doesn't even come for atonement at all. Meaning it gives a little bit less importance to the pouring of the remnant, and so perhaps that means, according to Rabbi Akiva, it is not necessary. If you should do it, it's a mitzvah, but if you didn't do it, then you don't have to go back and find further blood. Rav Papa Amar, Dekule Alma Shirayim and Me'akivin. Rav Papa disagrees and says, no, everybody agrees with Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael that the pouring of the remnant of the blood is not absolutely necessary. It's not Me'akiv. V'hacha b'misui hatat ha'of Me'akiv kamipalgeh. Mor sabar Me'akiv or mor sabar la Me'akiv. This is referring to a korban ole v'yored, where we have to take the bird, that we sprinkle the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, and the rest of the blood shall be wrung out or squeezed at the bottom of the altar. It is a sin offering. So for this, korban olev yored, it says once you do the sprinkling, and you could do it directly from the bird itself, then the leftovers you squeeze from the bird onto the base. So is that a necessary item to do or not? And so Rabbi Ishmael says, yes, that is necessary. If you don't do it, it's disqualified. Rabbi Akiva says, no, that's what we're talking about. That is not necessary. Now the Gemara will bring a proof for Rav Papa's interpretation. Tanya givated Rav Papa ve'et kol hadam ishpoch. Ma Talmud omar hapar limed al pal yom haKippurim sheta'un matan damim layesod divrei Rabbi. A Baraita supports Rav Papa that Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva both agree that pouring the remnant of the blood on the yesod is not me'akev from this pasuk. Now the pasuk is talking about the parhatat of a Kohen Gadol, and it says v'natan Kohen min hadam al mizbach ketoret hasamim. He's going to sprinkle onto the inside mizbeach lifnei Adonai asher be'ol moed, and then ve'et kol dam hapar yishpoch el yesod mizbach ha'olah asher petach ol moed. Notice that the first action, it says ve'natan with vav haipuch, but natan, otherwise a past verb, whereas yishpoch is a future verb. We'll get to that in a minute. But the question is here, how come it has to say ve'et kol dam hapad yishpoch? You could have left out the word pad, because I know it's talking about the pad. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. You could have just written ve'et kol dam hapad, ve'et kol hadam yishpoch, and I would have known. So what is the word hapad coming to add? So that's what we ask here. Ve'et kol hadam yishpoch. What is the word pad coming to teach? Oh, that's a reference, according to the Biuda Nasi, to the pad of Yom Kippur, that there also you have to put the remnant of the blood onto the base. That is the opinion of Rabbi. And so, but now we're going to see that there's a disagreement. And Amar Rabbi Ishmael, Kal vachomer. Rabbi Ishmael says, I don't need this pasuk to teach me this law, because I can figure it out from a Kal vachomer. Umay im mi she'en nichnas damo lifnim hoba ta'un yesod. Regarding the par hatat of Kohen Mashiach, where that blood, it is placed bifnim, it goes in the Kodesh, but it's not a chova. If the Kohen Gadol doesn't sin, then he doesn't have to bring it. It's not absolutely required all the time. And so that makes it less stringent, and yet you have to pour the remnant of the blood onto the base. Then, Misha nichnas damo lifnim chova, enodin sheta'on yesod, the person who has to bring the blood inside, that's the Yom Kippur part that the Kohen Gadol has to bring and sprinkle in the Kodesh. That's more stringent. All the more so, one will have to pour the remnant of the blood on the base. That's Rabbi Ishmael's proof. Amar Rabbi Akiva, he has a different proof. Umami she'en damo nichnas lifnai v'lifnim, ben lechoba ben lemitzvah, ta'un yesod, mi she'nichnas damo choba lifnai v'lifnim, en odin she'ta'un yesod. If in a case where the blood is not brought into the Kodesh Kodashim, that's referring to the Pad Hatat of Kohen Mashiach, which is brought into the Kodesh, but not into the Kodesh Kodashim. It's not a requirement. It's not even a mitzvah to put it in the Kodesh Kodashim. And yet, that has to be, the remnant has to be poured onto the base. All the more so, the Pad of Yom Kippur, where there is a requirement that it be sprinkled in the Kodesh Kodashim, all the more so that the remnant of that blood has to be poured onto the base. Therefore, we don't need a special pasuk to teach me that for Yom Kippur, for the pot of Yom Kippur, that you're supposed to pour the leftovers onto the base. Baraita continues and says, Yachol yakvenu, the fact that you have to pour the blood on the base on Yom Kippur, is that absolutely necessary? Is it me'akev? Talmud omar v'chila mekaper et hakodesh shalamu kol hakaparot kulan divrei Rabbi Ishmael. In Parashat Chukat, about the laws of Yom Kippur, It says that after he does all the sprinkling and he has made an end of atoning for the sanctuary, that means he finished atoning for the sanctuary. So that means he has completed all the kaparot, everything needed for atonement, and therefore what he does after that, which is pouring the blood onto the base of the Mizbeach, although he should do that, it's not me'akev, it will not, atonement will not depend on it, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael. Now the Braita says further, Kal vachomer lepar kohen Mashiach mi se'ir nasi me'ata. Once you're using this type of Kal vachomer, we can make a further one that we know regarding a king, his korban hatat of a sa'ir, one has to pour the remnant on the Mizbeach. We can use that as a basis of a Kal vachomer to learn that the Par Kohen Mashiach also, all the more so, one has to pour the remnant on the Mizbeach, on the base of the Mizbeach. And here's the Kal vachomer. Umami she'en nichnas damo lifnim, lo choba velo mitzvah ta'un yesod. If regarding the sa'ir of a king, where that blood does not go and enter into, not even the Kodesh, it's not required, it's not even a mitzvah, and yet that blood has to be poured onto the base. Misha nichnas damo lifnim, ben lo choba ben le mitzvah, en odin she'ta'un yesod. Then the Par Kohen Mashiach, where that blood has to be brought into the Kodesh, both as a requirement, as a mitzvah, all the more so, the remnant will have to be put on the Mizbeach. Yachol yakbenu, do you think it will be ma'akev, and you have to do that, and if you don't do it, you have to go back? Talmud Omar, ve'et kol dam hapad ishpoch. Well, now that's why it says that kol dam hapad ishpoch, all of the blood of the pad you will pour. Now, how does this pasuk mean that it's not me'akev? The Baita explains, niteko hakatub le'aseh. You see, it uses yishpoch in the future tense, and it places it after the action, not before it, as in here, v'natan is before, so you could have continued the same structure and said, v'natan, v'shafach, it called amapar. Instead, it places it after, so it separates it out, as in aseh, v'asa'o sheyareh mitzvah, lomar lecha shirayim en me'akevin, to make it not an essential part of the mitzvah, but rather an added part, extra credit, and that teaches you that the pouring out of the extra blood is not me'akev. And this, Rabbi Ishmael said. And so therefore we see that Rav Papa is correct, that Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva agree that pouring out the leftover of the blood, although it's a mitzvah, is not me'akev. Ve'savar Rabbi Ishmael misui chatat ha'of me'akev. We just cited Rav Papa, who said that the machloket between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva is about a bird hatat, whether one must squeeze out the remainder of the blood that is in the bird onto the base. Is that me'akev? You have to do it. And according to Rav Papa, Rabbi Ishmael says, yes, you have to. And if you don't do that, then it's invalid. You have to go and do it again. And Rabbi Akiva says, although it's a mitzvah, but it's not me'akev. Now, is that true? V'hatana debe Rabbi Ishmael. V'hanishar badam yimaseh. V'hanishar yimaseh v'she'eno nishar lo yimaseh. But there is a baraita from the school of Rabbi Ishmael, quoting that pasuk that says, the blood that is left over in the bird after you do the main sprinklings, you should squeeze out. That means if there is leftover blood, then squeeze it out. But what if there's no more leftover blood? Then you won't squeeze it out. And so it's not necessary to do. Only if you can do it, it's good. But if you don't do it, it's still valid. According to this, Rabbi Ishmael says it's not me'akev. And the answer is, Tere Tanaev, Alibad Rabbi Ishmael. There are two traditions, both in the name of Rabbi Ishmael. One, the one that Rav Papa was citing, said that yes, Rabbi Ishmael says me'akev, and this Baraita says that according to Rabbi Ishmael, squeezing out the leftover blood from the bird is not me'akev. Amar Rami Bar Chama, Hai Tana Sabar Shirayim Me'akebi. Rami Bar Chama says that the Tana, the author of the following Baraita, thinks that pouring out the remainder of blood for a korban is required. It's an essential part of the service, and if you don't do it, and you have to go back and do it all over again. De Tanya, HaKohen hamhateh ota. This pasuk is said regarding a korban hatat. It says, HaKohen hamhateh ota yochelena. The Kohen that offers this hatat offering shall eat it. B'makom kadosh te'achel b'chasar ohel moed. What do we learn from here? Ota shenitan dama lema'ala velo ota shenitan dama lemata. One, the sacrifice is valid only if the blood was placed above the red line. For a korban hatat of an animal, the blood has to be sprinkled up on the corners above the red line that goes through the middle of the mizbeach, and not if you put the blood below the red line, then it is not valid. And so the word ota is coming to be a limiting word to say, in one case it's valid, but not in a different case, not if it's only sprinkled below the line, it has to be above the line. Amarta v'chi me'ayin bata. And now we ask, where are you coming from? Meaning, why would you think otherwise? Why do you need a special word, ota, to teach me that below the line is not good? Why would you think it is okay? מכיוון שנאמר ודם זבחיך יישפך על מזבח וגומר, למדנו לניתנים במתן ארבעה, שאם נתנן במתנה אחת, כיפר, יכול אף הניתנים למעלה שנתנן למטה, כיפר. Because we have a different drasha from the pasuk in Sefer Devarim that says the blood of the korbanot shall be poured on the mizbeach. We learn from this pasuk that for a korban hatat, which lecha techila, you're supposed to have 4 sprinklings on the 4 corners. But what if b'di'avad, you only sprinkled it one time on one corner? Kiper, you get atonement, because it says vidam, one in singular. So once we have that pasuk and we know this law b'di'avad, you can do just one sprinkling, so that opens up the possibility that maybe it should be sprinkled on top, but maybe if you sprinkled it below the red line, maybe b'di'avad also that would be okay. That's why we need the word ota to teach us not so. But now we ask, why do you need this pasuk? Can't we figure it out from logic? V'dinhu nemru damim lema'ala v'nemru damim lemata. We can compare it to a bird offering. A bird hatat offering is sprinkled below. So it says damim regarding the korban hatat of an animal that it has to be above. And it says damim regarding a bird hatat offering that is supposed to be below. If you have a bird offering that's supposed to be below the line, and when sprinkles it above the line, it's no good. We learn this later on in the Gemara. So too, regarding a korban hatat of an animal, which is supposed to be above, if you put it below, also it's no good. Doesn't it make sense that we should compare these 2 cases and we can learn from the bird to the animal? But we reject that, and which is good. We want to reject that so that we can show why we need the word ota. לא, אם אמרת בתחתונים שניתנים בנתינה למעלה, שאין סופן למעלה לא כיפר. תאמר בעליונים שנתנן למטה, שיש בהן קרב למטה. You can't compare the bird offering, which is supposed to be below, and if you put it above, it's no good, because you're not going to put any of the blood of the bird on top, ever. It never is legitimately going to go on top. So therefore, the top region is totally no-go zone for the blood of the bird. And that's why if you put it above instead of below, it's no good. But you can't compare that to the animal chatat, where you're supposed to put it above, but eventually you're also going to put it below when you pour the leftover on the base. So therefore, the below the line area is valid for that blood, and eventually you are going to pour some of it there. And therefore, you're more likely to think that even though the bird, if you put it above, is no good, but for the animal, if you put it below, since it's somewhat valid, below, b'diavad, perhaps, that is mechaper, and it's a valid offering. So that's why I need the pasuk to teach me ota, that it's not valid. We ask further, damim hapinimim yochichu sheyesh mehem kare bachutz v'im netanan batechila bachutz lo kiper. Actually, we don't need the pasuk, because we can reject this logic by comparing this korban hatat to the animals that are sprinkled inside the kodesh, because there although you do all the main sprinklings inside, the rest of the blood will be poured outside on the base. After you finish sprinkling inside, you take it and you pour it on the base outside. And yet, with those inner korbanot, if one did the initial sprinklings outside, it would be no good. And so you see over here, just because eventually you pour it on the base of the outside mizbeach won't help you if you do the initial sprinklings outside. So too, there's no reason to think that the animal chatat, if you sprinkle it below instead of above, it will be good, just because eventually you're going to pour it below. Now, eventually pouring it below has no effect on the validity of the initial sprinklings in the inner, and therefore should not have any effect on the korban chatat. And therefore, if it's supposed to be sprinkled above and you sprinkle it below, it would be no good, just like the inner korbanot are no good. And therefore, we don't need the pasuk of otah. But we reject this also. Lo im amarta bedamim apnimiyim shen mizbeach apnimiyim memarkan tomar ba'alyonim sherek kedanot memarkot otan im netanan lemata kesherim. No, you cannot compare the inner korbanot where the sprinkling on the inner mizbeach does not make atonement. This is going to be a key line that we're going to cite, and right now we're assuming that it means it does not complete, the sprinklings inside does not complete. Well, why doesn't it complete? We're going to assume in a second that is because you still have to pour it on the outside, the base of the outside mizbeach, meaning that the pouring on the outside mizbeach, that's the completion, and it's not a valid korban. It doesn't totally atone until you do the outside. So you see, it is me'akev. That's the proof that we're using from this baraita. Okay, but first we have to finish off the baraita, and then we'll emphasize this line. So you can't compare the inner mizbeah, the inner korbanot, where the sprinkling inside does not yet complete it, and that's why you have to do the inner sprinklings on the inside, and then only then you can pour it on the outside, and you can't do the sprinklings on the outside. You can't compare that, which has that stringency, to tomar ba'alyonim, to the korban hatat of an animal that's supposed to be above, where once you sprinkle it on the corners, that's it. You've completed the atonement. You don't have to do anything else. So there, it's more lenient because all you need to do is the sprinkling on top to get atonement. So therefore, if one put it below, I might think it's also more lenient. Since it's more lenient in one law, maybe it's more lenient in a different law as well. And therefore, there is no comparison with the inner korbanot. And since there's no comparison from the inner, I may very well think that by putting it on top, if it's supposed to be on top, if I put it on the bottom, maybe b'diavad it's okay, because eventually I'm also going to put it on the bottom, and this one is a bit more lenient than the inner korbanot. Talmud omar otah shenitan damim lamala v'no shenitan dama lemata. That's why I need the word otah in this pasuk to be a limiting word. Only if I take a korban hatat, animal blood, and sprinkle it on top, then it's valid. But if I sprinkle it on the bottom, it's not valid. That's the end of the braita. Now here is Rami Bar Chama's proof that the author of this paraita thinks that shirayim is me'akev. Ma'ishe en mizbeach ha'penimim memarkan. What does he mean when he says that for the inner korbanot, the sprinkling in the inside does not complete the process? Isn't that referring lav elu shirayim? Isn't that referring to what else is there to do? Pouring it on the base of the mizbech, the leftover blood. And so you see, that is me'akev. So isn't that a good proof? Amar le Rava, ihachi tete bekal vachomer. Rava tells Rami Bar Chama, no, this is not a good proof that the author of this baraita thinks that shirayim is me'akev, because if you thought that shirayim is me'akev for the inner korbanot, then you would be able to learn this halacha from a kal vachomer. Here's the kal vachomer. Ma shirayim ha'penimiyim shesofan choba b'chutz, asan b'techila b'chutz lo kiper. If, with regard to sacrifices that are sprinkled on the inside, where you have to pour the leftover on the outside, so therefore the outside for these, the base of the mizbeach, for these korbanot, is more significant. And so you might think that since you're going to have to pour it on the outside, if you do the initial sprinklings on the outside, you'd be more likely to say that it's valid. And yet that's not true. If you put the initial sprinklings on the outside, no atonement. So if so, hanitanin lema'ala she'en sofan hoba lemata vasan batechila lemata enodin shelo kiper, then all the more so the korban hatat of the animal, where it's supposed to be on the where you're supposed to sprinkle it above, and there is no obligation to sprinkle it below, because that's the whole point. That only for the inner is there a requirement. It's me'akev. That even the Rami Bar Chama only proved from this baraita for inner sacrifices, the shiraim is me'akev, but for a korban chatat, it's not me'akev. So, for the korban chatat, where there's no chova, it's not me'akev, sprinkling it below. If you sprinkled it below, all the more so, it will not atone. In other words, if for the inner korbanot, where the base is going to be an absolute requirement, so it's more likely to think that if you put it on the initial sprinklings on the base, but the avad, maybe it's okay, but it's not okay. So all the more so for the korban chatat, where there is no chova at all to put it on the bottom. So the bottom of it is less important. So all the more so, b'diavad, if you put the initial sprinklings there, it will not mechaper. And so since we could have learned it from a kal vachomer, we would not need the pasuk otah. But in the baraita, we do need the pasuk otah, meaning that they don't have this kal vachomer. And the reason they don't have this kal vachomer is because the Tana does not assume that the base is required for any korbanot. Therefore, this Tana is not saying what you said, Rami Bar Chama. The Tana does not think that the pouring it on the base is me'akev. Ela en mizbeach hapenimim me'markan bilvad ela parochet. Rather, that line in the Braita that says the sprinklings on the inner altar do not complete the atonement by themselves. Well, that's because it also has to be sprinkled on the parochet. For the the chatat of Kohen Mashiach, you need sprinklings on the mizbeach, yes, but also has to be sprinkled on the parochet. That's what it means that that's not sufficient. It's not talking about at all the pouring of the blood on the outside. Teno Rabbanan vechila mikaper im kiper kila v'im lo kiper lo kila divrei Rabbi Akiba. Commenting on this pasuk regarding the Yom Kippur service, Pasuk says that after the Kohen Gadol does the sprinklings, Sheva Pamim, inside, then Vechila mikaper, he completes the atonement process. And then he goes to the Sa'ir HaMishtaleach. Why do you have to say that he completes the atonement of the Kodesh? Just go on to the next step. Why do you have to tell me that this is a completion? So we're going to have two interpretations. Rabbi Akiva says, Im kiper, if he has achieved atonement, then it's complete. But if he has not achieved atonement, then it's not complete. Meaning, if he did all the steps necessary, all of the sprinklings inside, if he misses any one of the sprinklings, then he has not achieved atonement, and then he's not finished. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda, mipnei ma lo ne'emar im kila kiper, im lo kila lo kiper, she'im haser achad mikol hamatanot lo asa ve'lo chilum. Rabbi Yehuda, it's not clear if he's arguing or not. We'll discuss that in a second. He says, why don't you say the other way around? If he finished everything he needs to do, then they gain kapara. If he has not finished, then he does not get kapara. And that teaches that if he missed out, skipped any one of the placements of the blood, then it's as if he did nothing. Now, my benaihu. It sounds like they're saying the same thing, that he has to complete the process to get atonement. If he gets atonement, he completes the process. What's the difference? Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So we have two answers to what their difference is, and one answer was said by Rabbi Yochanan, the other by Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. We don't know who said which one, but one of these two Amoraim said that these two Tanaim, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva, are not actually arguing on any halachic practical difference. Rather, they just want to understand what the pasuk means. They want to understand, does the pasuk mean when you finish, then you're atoned, or when you're atoned, then you're finished? But either way, the point is that they're saying you have to do all the sprinklings in order to achieve atonement. And they're just discussing what the interpretation of the pasuk. The other one of these Amoraim, however, says, no, there is a substantial difference between them regarding the halacha. Whether one has to pour the excess blood on the base of the Mizbeach. According to Rabbi Akiva, im kipped, if you did the sprinklings of atonement, you're finished. That's it. As all the sprinklings inside, you're finished. And then you're supposed to pour the leftover on the base of the outside Mizbeach, but if you don't, you already achieved atonement, you're done. Whereas, according to Rabbi Yehuda, im kila means if you completed everything, including the pouring of the blood on the base of the mizbech, the extra blood. If you did that, then you get kapara, which means it's me'akev. Shirayim is me'akev, according to the Yehuda. That's one of the two interpretations of their machloket. Now, let's try to identify whether it was Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Yosha ben Levi who said that they are arguing about shirayim me'akevin. Tistayem de Rabbi Yosha ben Levi, huda ma shirayim de me'akebi. It seems that Rabbi Yosha ben Levi, he's the one that thinks that, according to Rabbi Yehuda, shirayim is me'akev. Why? Damar Rabbi Yosha ben Levi, ledibrei ha'omer shirayim me'akevin, mevi parechad u'matchil betchila bifnim. Rabbi Yosha ben Levi says, according to the Tana, who says that shirayim me'akevin, if he did all the sprinklings inside, but then spilled the blood on the floor by mistake, then he has to start all over again, bring another pod, and he has to give all the sprinklings inside again, so that he'll have leftover, so that he can pour it on the base of the mizbeach. So let's assume that when Rabbi Yosha ben Levi says Lidivrei ha'omer, he's referring to the two opinions in this baraita, and he's saying according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that shirayim me'akev, and therefore it's Rabbi Yosha ben Levi. He's the one that thinks that they are arguing substantively, and Rabbi Yoshua says shirayim me'akevin. Rabbi Akiva says no, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan would be the other opinion that says no, they're just arguing on the interpretation on how to fit it into the pasuk, but actually neither of these Tanaim say that shirayim are me'akevin. But then we reject this because Atu Rabbi Yochanan let hasebara. So you're trying to say that Rabbi Yochanan does not think this reasoning and thinks that nobody in this machloket thinks shirayim me'akevin. Pa'amar Rabbi Yochanan Tana Rabbi Nehemiah kedivrei ha'omer shirayim me'akevin. Rabbi Nehemiah taught a braita according to the opinion that says shirayim me'akevin. So isn't that referring to one of these opinions, meaning Rabbi Yehuda, and who says shirayim me'akevin, and therefore it seems like Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says that in that baraita they are arguing about whether shirayim me'akevin or not. So now we have both of them are on the same side, but that can't be. Ela kedivrei haomer velav lahani tanaeh. Rather, it must be Rabbi Yochanan is saying that this Tana, the baraita of Rabbi Nehemiah, is like some Tana who thinks shirayim me'akevin, but he's not referring to this baraita of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva. He's saying someone. It's not necessarily associated with this baraita. If you say that about Rabbi Yochanan, then you could say the same thing regarding Rabbi Yosha ben Levi. Here also, when Rabbi Yosha ben Levi says Lidivrei ha'omer, he wasn't necessarily talking about one of these two Tanaim. He was referring to some Tana, whoever it is. Therefore, there is no proof whether it was Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Yosha ben Levi who said that they are making a substantive argument. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.